Hello everybody, this is Glenn Buckman with Mountain Fresh Water Systems. I'm happy to be with you for a little while to spend some time explaining how to change your filters and maintain your reverse osmosis drinking water system. You know, it's not very difficult. The first time or two you do it, after that you'll be an expert, but in the beginning it seems somewhat daunting, so we're making this video in hopes to be able to simplify the process a little bit. But bear in mind, if you ever get stuck in the process, by all means just drop what you're doing and just give me a phone call. I'll be glad to walk you through the basics. The phone number at the office is 480-899-8889. Again, that's 480-899-8889. Or you can email me at glenn@mfwater.com. That's Glenn, two N's in Glenn, Glenn @mfwater.com. So anyway, let's proceed. We'll be done in just a little while, okay? First of all, we want to take a look at our most popular system, which is the Pinnacle RO5. This is a 5-stage reverse osmosis unit. The first filter here is a white sediment filter. As I lay this out here, you'll see it's a simple sediment filter. It takes out dirt and particulates. There's nothing really exotic about it. It basically just removes dirt and everything down to about 5/10 thousandths of 1 micron, as I said. That's your first filter. The second filter is a little bit more intense. It basically removes chlorine and pesticides, things like that. It takes they take a high quality carbon, they grind it up powder fine, and then they run it through a machine that turns it into a block, almost like a stone, which is why they call it block carbon. And then that removes the chlorine and the pesticides. And of course, then there's actually 2 of them in the way. And then by the time you remove the dirt and all this organics here, then you go into your membrane, which is the heart of the unit. And then it goes through a final post filter, which we'll discuss the options on that later. And then it goes into your faucet. Now, the first thing I want to explain about the sediment filter is, as I said before, it just removes dirt and particulates. Sometimes when people pull this out, after they get done changing the filters, it's real dirty and they feel vindicated. Yes, it's time to change my filters. I didn't waste my money. On the other hand, what happens if it comes out nice and clean? Then conversely, the thought process would be, oh gee whiz, I don't need to change my filters yet. Not so. What happens is you have a secondary filter here, which is really the important filter. It removes the chlorine and the pesticides and things before it gets to the expensive module here called the membrane. If you don't remove the sediment of the dirt before it gets there, this can't do an effective job. However, if you don't have much dirt or filtration, that means great, this just did a better job longer. But you still need to change them. For a family up to 4, anywhere from 2 to 4 people, you'd want to change the filters once a year at the least. And then if you have a bigger family, 4, 5, 6 people, whatever, then you might want to change them every 6 months to 9 months, depending on the family size and the type of water you have. So as I set these filters aside for a few minutes, I want to just take a little bit more time to explain some of the basics here. The first thing you've got to remember is that there's a feed line going into the system, and there's a yellow line. All the systems that we sell at Mountain Fresh have a yellow line. That is our feed line going in always. And the first part you're going to see is the feed line going into the system. This little silver thing you see here is called a diverter valve. This will fit between your feed line going from the angle stop and then go to your regular house faucet. Now this diverts the water into a brass shutoff valve, which will have a little red handle on it. If the red handle is parallel to the valve, that means that your water is on. If you turn it perpendicular to the valve, then that means your water is shut off. So obviously that's the position you want to have before you start changing your filters. And it'll go through the yellow line and we stop the flow from there. Now there's another shutoff valve that we will use as well. It's called the John Guest valve, and this particular valve, these will be placed in line. The other one I showed you will be usually closer to your regular kitchen faucet, but underneath the sink, so sometimes you'll have to stretch back and get it. But this one could be right next to the unit itself. And when you see this little blue handle in line with the white housing, the white shut off, you know that this is open. So if you want to shut it, which you want to do obviously in changing your filters, it has to be perpendicular to the valve and the yellow line. Okay? So now your water going to the system is shut off. Now we want to back up a little bit and we want to take a look at the other thing you have to concern yourself with, which is the bladder tank. As the system makes water, it stores this water in here, and if this is not shut off, you're going to open up the filters and you'll have the water coming back from here and it'll be kind of messy. So as we look at this tank, we're going to get a little bit closer here. You know, we have this shutoff valve on top of the tank, just like we have the other brass shutoff valve. And you know, it goes, as you can see on the side here, it's a brass valve and it goes vertically aligned with the red tube. That means that that's how it goes in. Now, if the red handle is vertical along with the brass valve, that means that the tank is open. So obviously we want to shut this off. So we turn it this way so it is now perpendicular to the valve and the water can neither go in nor come out of the tank from that point on, okay? So now the next thing you want to do is you want to release the pressure from the system now that you shut off the line going in, the line coming out, and that brings you to your regular RO faucet. Now this is the faucet that we seem to sell the most of. It's called the 905 series. You may have something different, no big deal. Just know that when you open the faucet here, after you shut off the lines, you'll see a little spurt of water, and that will release the pressure. Now you're able to open up the system without having water start to fly all over the place, okay? So now, let's back up just a little bit here. Now just pretend, if you will, that we've opened up your counters. We pulled the reverse osmosis module out and we want to set it on the floor. We want to lay it out on a towel. You should usually have a regular bath towel that's maybe laid over a double. And then you want to lay this down on that towel flat, okay? Just like this. Now you won't have these tubes flying all over the place because they'll be connected. Now, the next thing you'll have is a black spanner wrench. Now this black spanner wrench, if you don't have one, we sell them for $5 online. And if you're looking underneath the housings, you want to go underneath here and you want to get it like this. And you want to make sure that you're going to turn the housings counterclockwise to open them up. Okay, so now if it's been used for a year, it may be a little difficult to open them up, so you just give them a good tug. There we go, there we go. And now you only turn them open about a quarter of a turn, because if you do more than that, then you'll have water all over the place. So again, what we want to do is open this up. We set it up right. And as you open this up, you're going to find that this housing here will have your sediment filter in here. So as we take this white sediment filter out, again, as I said before, you may find that it may or may not be dirty. Just throw it away and put a new one in. If you want to save a few dollars and it's perfectly clean, just rinse it off and put it back in. You can do that 2 years and save yourself $3, whatever. Nonetheless, as you're looking on the inside of the housing, the most important thing to remember is there is a rubber O-ring on the inside. You have to put your finger in here and make sure that there's a lip that holds that O-ring. You got to make sure that that is lying flat within the lip, because if it's not, if it's up over the edge and you tighten it down, you will stretch the O-ring or you will break it. Nonetheless, you're still going to end up with a leak. So be sure that you have it nice and flat and lay it down. Put the new filter back in. Bear in mind, there's also a male part on the inside of the housing that will accommodate this hole in the center, and you make sure it's in the right place. You probably can't get it shut otherwise. Okay, and there we go. Okay, and then you screw it back in just the same way you took it out. So nothing difficult about that. Now you want to make sure that also the silver label that you see here is now underneath the brass fitting. Now we're going to do the second filter. We're going to open this one up. Same deal, you got a different kind of filter here. But the reason I take a little bit more time on this particular filter is you have the block carbon filters. The same thing, you want to be concerned with making sure that this O-ring here is lying flat at all times. But also you may see when you look inside the housing that sometimes a rubber grommet at the end of the filter may have dropped itself off in there, and you have to be able to pull that out. Sometimes it's actually even stuck on the bottom and the inside. You have to take a screwdriver or a knife or a pliers or something and reach down and pull this out, because if you do not, it will be too tight. You won't get a good seal. You might even in fact rupture or break the filter, and you don't want to do that. So be sure that when you put the new filter back in, that both grommets are both on both ends, and you're setting them in there, and then you want to set them in nicely. Of course, make sure that the male part fits into the hole, and then you're back in business. Now something else sometimes people will do is some warm water and run it through here just to rinse any physical dirt or debris out. In fact, if you want to even use chlorinated water to sanitize it periodically, that's fine. Usually I don't recommend necessarily taking the time or effort to do a sanitation, except for maybe every couple, 2 or 3 years. And I'll show you how to do that part of this video. But it truly isn't necessary each year if you're on a chlorinated supplies such as what we have in the Phoenix area. Most of the Phoenix water is usually about half a part per million up to 0.8 parts per million, which is slightly less than what a pool will be. So there are really no bacteria growing in the Phoenix water very much. So again, we have all filters changed at this point. We're going to lay it back down, the same process, only in reverse. We're going to take the spanner wrench. We're going to go underneath. Instead of going counterclockwise, we're now going to turn them clockwise. And we're going to make sure that that silver label is slightly past the brass fittings, such as you see here, okay? Now that part of it's done. That's actually pretty simple. Now the next part, it'll take a little bit more time. That is our post filter. Now bear in mind that our water is being manufactured here. We have the water coming from the tank into the final post filter. Now since the final stage goes to the faucet here, you need to disconnect the one tube to be able to unscrew this. I usually will take the blue tube. There's a brass compression nut on the end of it. I will unscrew this. Now, get it out of the way. The nice thing about brass fittings, which is what our systems have almost exclusively, is that once you've got them set in place, they don't leak. And that's a big plus, because I know a lot of companies are using plastic fittings. We'll discuss those later. But they historically will always leak, and it's just a common plague we have to deal with. So I like the brass fittings because they don't leak, and we use no lead brass, so they don't leach lead either, which is the only reason why plastic fittings came to be anyhow. So anyway, now what we do is we pop this filter out of the cradle, and you see we have this red tube with a T on the end of it. We simply hold this in place, and then we can unscrew this filter from that T. Okay? Now, at the same time, we're going to take our pliers. We're going to hold the T here. We're going to hold the fitting at the other end of the filter, the old filter, out. And we're going to unscrew that. And we're going to throw it away, and we're going to use a new filter. This is a new filter, so we're going to reuse it, obviously. One thing I want to show you that is very important to remember, when we're looking at the brass fittings, there will be Teflon tape on the end of it. I'll come closer to the camera for a moment. As you see here, there's some tape here on the Teflon. There's some Teflon tape at the end of the fitting. We want to remove that before putting new tape on there, because if it builds up too much, as you screw it into the plastic fit, the housing of the filter, it could potentially break that filter, so you don't want to use that. So we take a regular, like a utility knife, and just get underneath there and scrape a little bit of the old tape off. Again, you don't have to get real concerned about this. It's just a matter of we want to remove any excess there so it's not too cumbersome to work with in the future. Okay? Okay, so I'll just do this. Only takes a second, or 2 or 3 or 4. Anyway, Anyway, you get the idea. So anyway, now, the point is, as you're looking at this fitting, you notice there's a hole. This is the part that screws into the filter. Then the other hole, of course, is your compression fitting. We're only concerned with the part that has the Teflon tape on it, okay? Now, we want to put more Teflon tape on this fitting. So how we do it, it always goes on clockwise, okay? So as you're looking into the fitting, you want to make sure that it goes around clockwise, just like the way the clock goes. Okay, so we're going to go here and we're going to hold it in place. Then we want to go somewhere between 4 and 6 wraps around the threads. Okay, snug them up, push them down a little bit to make sure those threads have a lot of Teflon in there, because that's what prevents the leaks. Okay, and then you would take the filter, and you want to put this in the end as the arrow will direct. Now I want to explain something quickly. There's an arrow, it says flow on every filter. Every filter I've ever used anyway has an embossment here. It says flow. However, sometimes they'll put the label over it and you won't see it, or they may have the label on backwards, and if you're reading the label, it may be going the wrong direction. You know, these manufacturers don't always pay attention. So one thing to always be sure is there's 2 ends to this filter. Can you see the difference? This one's smaller and this one's bigger. How they make these filters, they extrude the plastic, they pack it with carbon, then they put a cap on there, and they use a plastic welding system to do that. And so the one end is always slightly bigger than the other one. The bigger end is always the flow into the filter. So therefore, the elbow that I showed you going from basically the red tube, the T, goes from the big end to the small end. So this elbow should go in the small end at all times. So I'm going to show you how that fits. Okay. And one thing I want to tell you too, with brass fittings versus into plastic, they love to cross thread themselves. So you want to make sure that you go in there straight, and so you, by the time you're done, as you're watching it, it's not up one side or down the other. Okay. So now we've got this all taken care of. We're going to essentially do the same thing to the fitting here. For time's sake, I'm not going to go through the whole process, but we would remove the tape here. We would put more Teflon tape around clockwise, and then we would take the bigger end of the filter and screw it on here until you get in, close enough that you've got a good seal there. And then, my friends, that's all you have to do. You snap it back into the cradle, and for the most part you're done. What you need to do now, of course, is you need to take the blue end, the blue tube going to the faucet. It needs to be reattached to the product flow end, which is the single elbow here. And you, of course, would snug it down with your pliers, or you open and wrench. You don't have to really crank on it because these are brass fittings as opposed to plastic, okay? Now, what is left to do is we have to make sure that the system's up and running. We want to make sure that we clean this filter out. So now we turn on your water flow again. So now where your red handle will be going perpendicular, we want to make it so it's open. Okay, so it's got to be parallel to the brass valve. And also we want to open up the tank. So the red shut off on the tank should also be parallel to the tube. Okay? Now, at that point, you're going to have water coming to the faucet. You should, in fact, open your faucet, and you will see a lot of black water coming out of here at first. And what that does is that flushes all the carbon dust from the top post filter. So this is a normal thing. You may have to clean up your sink a little bit when you're all done, but that's essentially what happens, okay? So we're going to flush about whatever was in your tank, usually a gallon or two. You want to flush that and use it to flush the top filter. And then that way your water is fairly close to ready to being used. Now, the last thing you want to do is you want to leave all that water run from the faucet until it just dribbles, because that's the rate of production from the RO system itself. However, if you go here and you still shake the water and there's still some water in there, that means that you need to put some pressure in the tank. And regardless of whether you do that or not, I would always double check the pressure. How you do it, it has a Schrader valve. The Schrader valve is a bicycle valve. Everybody has ever ridden a bicycle has seen these before. So just for explanation's sake, I'm going to bring it a little bit closer. There you go. Hang on just a minute here. Okay, thank you. Now this little valve here at the bottom here is a Schrader valve, like a bicycle valve, and you have to put either a bicycle pump or a small compressor on here and start pumping. And come on, my little gizmo here on the camera is giving me a difficult time today. There we go. Now, what will happen is you want to pump this up, and you want to make sure it has at least 8, preferably closer to 10 pounds of pressure in the tank when the tank is completely empty. So if you take your compressor or your bicycle valve, pump away and make sure there's enough air pushing against here, then you should get to the point where you can test the pressure. Now, what we'd recommend is you get yourself a little low pressure gauge. Sometimes you can pick them up at the hardware store, or maybe AutoZone or something like that. If not, then we sell them online. I think they're $6.99, $6, $6.50, something like that. I don't know offhand. And then this will go right on the end here. Now you want to make sure it has about 10 pounds of pressure in it. So as you push this on here, as you can see, it's preset here at 10 pounds because I already pumped up the tank for the demonstration. Now, as you have 10 pounds of pressure in here, that's usually ideal. If you have, say, 8 pounds in there, that's usually fine too. However, bear in mind that these tanks will lose a couple pounds of pressure each year. And if you happen to miss a year, next thing you know, you don't have enough pressure to push all the water out. And what will happen is that you'll end up having some water stay in here non-chlorinated. It will get rancid and eventually grow some bacteria. So you don't want to do that. Now, in addition to that, if you have too much pressure in there, like 12 to 15 pounds, it'll come out maybe slightly faster, not by much, by the way, but you'll have very little reservoir of water, so you won't be able to store more than a half a gallon or more at a time. So anywhere between 8 and 10 pounds of pressure seems to be ideal, unless you're on a house that has maybe an ice maker line that's more than, say, 15 feet away, maybe 20 feet away, and then you may have difficulty, so you could move it up to perhaps 12 pounds. But more than 12 pounds will really not make your water come out faster, because bear in mind your refrigerator still ends up having a 1/4 inch inlet, and even though this is 3/8 inch system, by the time you get to your refrigerator you're still at a 1/4 of an inch, so you're not going to come through the water, the ice maker, any faster. Okay, and so after you're all said and done, you get the pressure, I would tell the customer, I would tell, of course, to be sure that the tank has a chance to clean itself out. So once it's all done, you got it all pressurized, you close the faucet and let it wait for about an hour or an hour and a half. You want to fill up this tank of water with the filters being flushed, and then you want to open it up and throw the first tank away. Now at that point I usually tell my customers to let it go ahead and use the water through the rest of the day, there's nothing wrong with it, but still before the end of the day throw a second tank away, because there's oxygen, there's carbon dust coming out of these brand new filters, and it can come through. The water may look a little murky, and if it comes through with bubbles and stuff like that it looks murky, but if you let it sit there it clears up. It's simply oxygen, so don't be alarmed, there's nothing harmful about it. But just to make sure that it clears up good, you want to go through 2, maybe even 3 tanks of water. And then that's pretty much it. So that's pretty much the crux of changing the filters. Now we're going to go to the next part where you're going to see the acid test. You'll see me changing the filters under my own sink in my own home, and you'll see exactly how quick it can be done, because I'll be just zipping through there real quick. So I'll see you on the other side. Thank you. Okay everybody, welcome back. Now I just want to take a few minutes with you to show you how to change the filters on a real functioning reverse osmosis unit. This is the one in my own home. So first of all, we want to lay the filters out. I've got all the wrappers off, I've got the end caps off, I've got a towel, and then I also have over here the set of tools that you'll need. You'll need a pliers or an open end wrench or an adjustable wrench. You'll need an X-Acto knife or a utility knife. You need the you'll need this gauge, but you won't really need it. You can buy one if you want, but a lot of times people will do it without doing it. I do it every day, so I need to know what's going on. I need to see the quality of water, and I'll show you how in a minute. We also have to have the spanner wrench to open the filters with. Then we have the Teflon tape. And the last thing we need is the pressure gauge. Now you can get a pressure gauge. We sell them online for about, I think they're about $6 or whatever. So these are good quality, low pressure gauges. So I'm going to set all this here, and the first thing we're going to do is lay out a towel. Put the filters here in the new filters here in the sink, temporarily get them out of the way. And we're going to lay out a towel. And then we're going to pull out the reverse osmosis system itself. Now, as you can see, on my system here, we have the tank laying sideways. That's the way it works best in my home. And we have this yellow line that has the blue shutoff valve. Now, if you remember from the previous video, the blue line, the blue handle going in line with the yellow tube means that the feed line is open. So if we opened it up right now, we'd have water all over the place. Not a good thing. So we're going to shut that off here. And if you look on the top of the faucet, on top of my tank here, it's closed right now. Now it's open. We're going to close that as well. Right at the moment, we're going to leave it open because I want to test the water just to show you the quality. And what we would do is we would open up the tap faucet, the regular faucet. And this, when I put the water in the meter here, it tells me that my water quality going in is 554 parts per million of total dissolved solids, okay? Now, the next step is to open up the RO tap water, put some water in here, and tells me that my quality is essentially 40 parts per million. So that quality is good. It's less than 90%, it's more than 90% rejection, 92, 93% rejection. So we're not going to change the reverse osmosis module. It's working just great. Which if you change your filters every year, you will probably have that for at least 5 or 6 years. So now that part's done. So what we do now is we turn off the tank, and then the last thing we do is we open up the faucet to release the pressure, the spurt of water, and now it's stopped dripping. Now we know we can get started. So the first thing I do is I disconnect the blue tube from the post filter, which is this filter here, and I disconnect this over the towel because there might be some water in the blue line coming down, and we want to make sure that we don't have it all over the floor, just like that, okay? Then we're going to unscrew this from the red T, the red tube's going to the brass T, and we're going to put this in the sink real fast because it's got water coming out of it, and we're going to unscrew this. Now, what I do at this point, I take the X-Acto knife or the utility knife, and I cut the extra tape off here, because if you don't cut this off every year, then it builds up to the point where it actually will be so thick that it'll actually break the filter if you tighten it in too tight. So this way we take off all the old tape. And we do that, and we also take the tape off of the red tube on this side. Okay. And just the excess. It doesn't have to be perfect, just enough so it doesn't build up real thick, and then of course, like I said before, it can break the filter as it goes in. I'll shut this off a little bit there. Okay, now what we do, we want to put some Teflon tape around these fittings. Now my shutoff valve isn't working real well. I think the one on top of the tank, so it may drip just a little bit. So we'd want to pack this one in pretty good. First thing I want to show you is on the brass fitting. You'll have both brass fittings. So if you take a look at this, you see there's a hole in the center here. That's your inlet set of the fitting. So we're going to take the tape and snuggle up to this, and we all want to always go in a clockwise direction and put the tape on the threads. Now that they're nice and clean, we want around about 4 or 5, maybe 6 wraps of this Teflon tape around the filter and snap it off. And we want to do the exact same thing with that Teflon with the fitting here. And so, okay, if you can see this hopefully real well. Then we want to wrap this around, like I said, about 4, 5, 6 wraps. No more than 6 because it gets to be too much. And also be careful when you're wrapping this tape around that you do not overlap the tape over the hole, otherwise it's going to slow down your flow rate. Now it sounds like a simple, logical thing to do, but I've had installers and service people do it on a constant basis. Certainly customers will do it. So I always caution you to make sure that that is always open, because a piece of tape over that is obviously going to mess up the flow rate coming out, and you'll think there's something wrong when there isn't. So anyway, so now we're going to take the new filter, and the one thing I want you to be aware of, there is a arrow pointing this direction, and we want to always have the single fitting, the blue line, going to the arrow, to the pointed side of the arrow, because it always flows from the red, the fitting down here of the red, to the blue. Okay? Now that we've snugged that in a little bit, we want to do the same thing here. Now you always want to make sure that you have the fitting on the filter on the fitting straight. You don't want to cross thread it, because that'll simply create a leak, and obviously we want to avoid those like the plague. So anyway, and then lay that down all the way, and then when you're all done, you want to have this in such a way that when it's come back down, you want to have the fitting coming out this direction, straight out, or maybe slightly up. So there you go. All right, now we also want to undo these fittings on the bottom, these filters on the bottom, and there we take the spanner wrench. Now, as I said in the earlier video, we want to go from right to left if it's going underneath it. So we want to go from right to left, which would be got a little pressure here. Okay, a little too much pressure. You see why you have a towel down, guys, okay? A little bit more pressure here. Okay. There we go. And so, what we want to do, we want to undo these filters. This direction here, we want to unscrew the filter. And as we pull this out, you see this is the first filter. This is the sediment filter that sees the dirty water first. So you can see it's kind of brown. Sometimes it gets like really muddy, thick brown, and sometimes it comes through looking perfectly white. So the big caution I would tell you is that do not assume that since this filter is white, you do not have to change the filters. You do have to change the filters primarily because of the high chlorine levels. The dirt on the the reason for this first filter is goes a white one, as you can see. The reason why we use this first filter is to remove the high quantity of particulates, because if you let that get through to the carbon filters, the carbon cannot absorb the chlorine, and that's what will do damage to your membrane. Not the dirt, but the chlorine getting through. Now, one thing I also want to tell you, when you're putting any of these housings back, there is a female recession that will hold an O-ring. This O-ring, you have to be laying flat. If it's bunched up or something like that, because you turn it down too tight, it will create a leak. So you want to make sure that, put your finger in here and make sure it's nice and flat, okay? Then we take the sediment filter, put it back in here. There's a little male notch there, you'll see, so you can get into place there. There you go. And then you put it right back on. That's the first one. Now again, the reason why we have these standing up, why we take them off just a half a notch, a half a turn down, is because they're full of water, and we want to make sure we don't get all this water all over the place. Okay, so now we take the old filter out. Now you can see this one's kind of dirty, but the new one we're going to put these separate here. Rinse that out again. And same thing on every time, you make sure that this O-ring is perfectly flat inside. Take the new filter, put it back in. Be sure you get the male and the female parts connected correctly. All right. And then snug it back down this way. All right. And then the last filter will be, again, the same deal. Okay. Okay. Put the old filter out there. Rinse it out. Make sure that the O-ring is flat. Set this back in, and we're off and running. And we got all three of the bottom filters changed. No big deal. Right? Now, the first time or two you do this, it may be a little uncomfortable. You'll find after you do it 2 or 3 times, you will then be an expert. Not a big deal. Okay. So as we lay this back down, it's time to snug these down. Now, one thing I want to make sure you're clear on: these silver filters, these silver labels, should be directly underneath the brass fitting. And when you're done, you want to snug them down just a little bit so they're slightly past. You don't want to really crank down on them, because then you'll rupture that O-ring. You'll have to buy a new one, and more importantly, you're going to probably end up with a leak. So we want to make sure we just get them past there a little bit so they look something more like this, okay? Now, the last thing to do, because we've got a little bit more room to play with here, would be to attach the blue fitting. We're going to set this correct. We're going to take the blue line and put it into the fitting at the top of the post filter. That is the outgoing line to the blue line, which will go through the faucet. You got to tighten this down. Now, the nice thing about brass fittings is once you get them set in there, they don't leak. You just have to snug them down a little bit, so it's not a big heavy thing where you got to torque everything down all the time. Okay. Now, this is pretty much it. Now, the only thing you do now is you open up the line to get water into the system. Double check and make sure there's no surprise leaks. Then you turn on the tank. And then you'll see more carbon dust come out of here, but we already did a retake on this video, so you'll see carbon dust come out of here at first. When it comes through all black, don't get all concerned. And just the carbon dust that comes into the top filter here, it's from the post filter. You're going to let a couple gallons of water that's in the tank run through here to flush that filter. And then when it's all said and done, the tank will empty itself. It'll take a while. And we're going to let all that water flush into the drain, and in a matter of minutes it's going to empty itself. Now, what we're going to do, we're going to take our pump. Okay, now if you don't have a regular compressor, you don't have to go out and buy one. You may want to use a bicycle pump or something. We're going to take the cap off of the Schrader valve. The Schrader valve is the bicycle valve on the end of the tank. You can see it here inside. And now your tank may be stirring up and down and may be on its side. The way my sink is configured, it works better that way. Okay, so what we do now is we turn the compressor on for just a few minutes to pump a little bit of air in there, because every year we put about 10 pounds of pressure in there, and every year it loses 3 or 4 pounds. So we want to make sure that every year we pump it back up. This is probably the single most important thing that our customers seem to forget. This has to be done each and every time. Otherwise, it doesn't have enough pressure to push all the water out, because it's air pushing against that big rubber balloon on the inside. And if you don't put pressure behind it, it doesn't get all the water out. So it stays in there non-chlorinated and starts to grow bacteria, starts to smell, and you'll only get like a couple cupfuls of water at a time out. So it's very important that every year you get a chance to pressurize this again. So here we go. Just a matter of minutes. That's all you have to do. Now, this may take longer or shorter depending on how old the tank is. As the tank is older, this tank's about 5 or 6 years old, but it gets maintained every year, so we want to make sure that we have enough pressure out of there. Now, we're waiting for this tank to completely empty. All the water's coming out of the tank. In just a few minutes, it'll empty and it'll just dribble. And when it's done, we're going to check the pressure, and then we'll be all done. It's one of those dramatic pauses where we're waiting for the tank to empty, so we'll just give it a few more minutes here. Yeah, the tank is almost empty. No kidding, guys, this will end real soon. There you go. Okay. Now, the rate that you see the water coming out is the rate that it's actually being produced by this membrane. This is a 36-gallon-a-day membrane, like our top-of-line Pinnacle RO5 will have, 30 to 36 gallons a day. And the quantity and the quality will be predicated upon how much total dissolved solids you have, what the total temperature is of the water, and also what the pressure behind it is, you know, coming into the house. But this is the rate it's being made right now. It's making the water probably a good 20 gallons a day, and most people have a hard time drinking that much. That's over a 24-hour window. Okay, so we're going to put this back down, and the last thing is we're going to check the pressure in the tank. It'll probably be more than 10 pounds. It's actually 11 pounds, which I'm pretty good at this. I usually get to guess how much air is in there. So if there is too much air in there, you simply put your gauge on, let a little air out, retest it, and now it's perfect at 10 pounds. Okay, so there you go, and we'll put the cap back on. All the time you're double checking to make sure there's no surprise leaks over on this side, but right now it's just working fine. So now we're going to set all this back in. Give myself a little room here. And we are set for another year. And usually a family of 4 should change them, usually up to 4 should change them maybe once a year. A bigger family of 6, maybe you might change them every 9 months, 6 months to 9 months, something like that. But that, for the most part, is all you have to do, and it's up and running. Now, the one thing I would tell you is you want to let the system make about a gallon, gallon and a half of water, which means you're going to let it run inside here, collecting water in the accumulator tank for probably an hour, maybe an hour and a half, and then you're going to come over here and you're going to flip the handle up, let all that water run out, because if you don't, it'll have oxygen, it'll have carbon dust in there. You'll pour a glass of water and it'll look kind of hazy, but then it'll clear up. This alarms people. They think there's something wrong with it, and it's just carbon dust and oxygen. So we want to flush the first tank right away. Then go ahead and use it for the rest of the day, but later on in the evening, before you go to bed, flip the handle up again and let the second tank come out. So you're actually throwing 2 tanks of water away before you start using the system on a regular basis. Now, I hope this has been of help. If you have any questions, like I said earlier, email me at Glenn, Glenn, at mfwater.com, or call me on the phone, 480-899-8889. I'll be glad to answer any questions or help you as much as I can. Thanks again, and we'll see you on the other side of the video. Bye-bye.